Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Banking on Innovation podcast. I'm Jody Buggett. I'm so pleased to welcome today Lindsey Johnson, the president and CEO of the Consumer Bankers Association, which represents the retail banking industry, including the nation's largest bank holding companies, as well as regional and community banks. Lindsey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jody.
It's so great to have you. You know, Lindsey is groundbreaking in so many ways. Just one of them being that she's the first woman to serve as president and CEO of the CBA, and the only woman at the helm of a trade organization representing large U.S.-based banks. So we're very pleased to have you.
Oh, thank you very much.
So Lindsey, you started your tenure with the CBA just this past July, I believe, and then we met in October, if you recall, at the Second Curve CEO event by Tom Brown.
That's right.
And I must say, you were just so gracious at the event, and that initial meeting has led us to this podcast. So it's great to get to know you in such a compressed time frame, just in the last few months, and just really impressed with the role that you've taken on, as well as the impact that the CBA has on the industry.
Well, likewise, I've appreciated getting to know you. You put out great content. And really have such great connectivity to so many great industry leaders. So appreciate being on this podcast with you and just the chance that we've had to get to know each other.
Yeah, awesome. So Lindsey, you've had such a remarkable and eclectic background. It spanned banking, legislative, and consulting experiences. So perhaps you can share with the audience, how has this background prepared you for such a high-profile role as president and CEO of the CBA?
Well, I've always been at that intersection between policy and banking or financial services. And so, I think that you kind of get the full understanding of, and appreciation of one, kind of what banks do, and have been at a Federal Home Loan Bank and work incredibly close with our bank member owners at the Federal Home Loan Bank. I've been in other, private sector companies, financial services companies. And I think that you really have a full appreciation of how a business operates to serve the needs of their communities, to serve the needs of their consumers, and a full appreciation for how policy, directly and indirectly, enables or prohibits them from doing that. And then taking that experience and going into Capitol Hill and, really having an appreciation for what are policymakers thinking about? How are they working on creating sustainability, on looking at safety and soundness issues, on enhancing and making more efficient the process for these financial institutions to do what they do? And I had the privilege of doing that. It was one of the best experiences of my career. It's often frustrating, and it's often, all the challenges and the personalities and the misunderstandings and everything else that goes into politics and policies. But it's such an important role and responsibilities when you're in that position. And then taking that experience and taking that understanding of what policymakers are facing, what they deal with, and taking it to another trade association where I was leading another trade association or a PwC and working on in their policy world. And understanding how those two worlds are melded together and how to take the most effective advocacy to Capitol Hill to hopefully, effectuate change that you need to see and to create the best regulatory and operating environment for your members. And for me at CBA, that is our biggest mission, is to create that best regulatory and operating environment for our members. We work with them every single day as they go out into their communities and lend directly to consumers and small businesses and really shape what we see as Main Street America on a daily basis. So it's a privilege for me to do that. It's a huge responsibility for CBA and something that we are incredibly proud to do.
Just in listening to you, one can just appreciate or surmise the enormity of the role. And it's good to know, by the way, that this, as laymen, as we perceive the things that happen on the Hill and stuff, that it's good to know that it is complicated and it's not just us perceiving it that way. But for those in our audience that may not be fully aware of the expansive and prominent role that the CBA plays, can you just share more about the scope and the charter and mandate?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, CBA is the leading voice for Americans, leading banks and retail banks here in D.C. And you've got a lot of different trade associations. You have a number of different banking associations, but CBA is the only banking association that's focused exclusively on consumer retail issues. And so if it touches a consumer, CBA is a leading voice. Our members are primarily 10 billion and above. And so that really helps us to focus, both because of the retail focus and also just the asset size of most of our members, helps us be very focused in the issue sets that we pursue. Most of the issues, or many of the issues, are related to CFPB because it's consumer. The CFPB is very focused on institutions of a certain asset size. So that also gives us a very narrow focus. That helps us be incredibly effective at what we do. We can speak with one voice. We know exactly what our mandate is. And so we are incredibly effective in our advocacy that way. We also take a lot of pride in our mission. And our mission is to help create the next generation of diverse bankers to lead the industry. And we are, really proud of the work that our members are doing in this area. We have an education program, both internal at our members, where we take education programming, very advanced, very focused retail banking education to our members. We also actually have a school that happens in the summer at Furman University, where we bring in senior leaders of banks, and they go through an incredibly immersive, intensive program. And I'm happy to say that, this last year, we had the most diverse set of freshmen, our most diverse freshman class we've had, which just demonstrates our members' commitment to really fulfill our mission. So we're really proud of that. We're really proud of the advocacy work we do, and we've got a lot more work in front of us.
Wow, that's impressive. And I can appreciate I just hear the passion and commitment in your voice. Lindsey, we're in a fascinating period, but one could argue also a very challenging time for households in the U.S. We have high inflation, economic uncertainty, weak consumer sentiment. How is the environment that we're in today shaping the agenda of the CBA?
Well, we are keenly aware of those economic headwinds, of the challenges that are facing consumers. I think that we were really pleasantly surprised coming through the pandemic, how consumers' savings weathered, for the most part. But we've seen a huge drop in consumer savings. Right. We had about $2.3 trillion drop to about $1.2 trillion overall in consumer savings over the last year. And the majority of wealthier Americans are not nearly as impacted as lower income Americans. A recent survey, demonstrates that same statistics that we continue to hear, but about half of all Americans are unable to afford a $1,000 emergency crisis. And, you think about that situation and the fact that 40% of small businesses have said that they may not be able to pay rent. We're facing some real challenges going ahead. And so we are thinking about, ways that we can continue to improve, how our banks operate in their communities. How can we make it more efficient and effective? You see our banks leading in this space in terms of innovation. You see them really kind of being very innovative in overdraft products and reducing costs to consumers. There's been a huge shift in the overdraft market to make sure that they are reducing and in some cases eliminating overdraft fees to the extent that they can, really coming up with innovative ways. But more has to be done. And so we're, as CBA is looking to what more will consumers need going into this next economic cycle. We have created a very short list of very tangible things and steps that policymakers can take to help consumers, including small dollar loans. We think that some reforms can be made to give banks more certainty in this area so they can do more small dollar lending. We also think that there can be a lot of streamlining in the small business lending programs to create greater efficiencies for lenders so that they can do more of these loans. There's a great appetite for our lenders to help in these areas, but we just need a little bit more attention and some steps to be taken from the regulatory world to help them do what they need to do.
It's great to hear that you've really got your pulse on, or your hand on the pulse, not just of the banks, but also of the household. And the point that you made there, that consumer household had really built up a savings cushion. In fact, I think coming out of the pandemic, savings were about 25% higher per household. But as you pointed out, that started to dissipate.
Yeah. Especially on the lower end, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It doesn't take very much to shift a customer that may have just $1,500 in savings with higher inflation and economic uncertainty to shift. And I know that banks are trying to do what they can to help anticipate some of those issues. As you said, lowering overdraft is one, but also helping customers anticipate when they may have cash flow issues, and being able to lend appropriately and better manage their spending are all part of the agenda.
And we've been watching the savings rate. We've been watching consumer habits for a long time, and our members, connect on a very regular basis through our committees. We've got 14 committees where we're sharing information about what we're seeing, trends in the marketplace. Because at the end of the day, we've known for a little while that it's very likely, and within the first or second quarter of this year, the lower end of the market is going to run through that savings. And so, again, preparing for what that means for those consumers, really trying to, anticipate their needs from a regulatory perspective, advocating for the products that might be necessary. All those things are going to be critically important going forward.
Yeah, it's a great segue into my next question, which is, in a recent interview with American Banker, you actually commented on how policymakers and banks can work together to ensure every American has access to the financial tools that they need and demand. What are the steps that you see that can be taken to deliver on this ambition?
Well, first, Jody, I think we've really got to turn this corner and turn, to a new chapter where policymakers don't see banks as adversaries. We are so far beyond that. The banking system is, so much more sound and safe, and focused on, how to anticipate the next generation of individuals' needs or financial needs. But we need to partner with policymakers to make sure that we can offer, these different products to consumers. And when we talk about, especially when we hear from policymakers who may suggest that they want more individuals within the banking system, but then say misleading statements about the banking system, that becomes a challenge for consumers to really discern,
Right.
truth from myth. So our members have the same objectives as many of these policymakers we work with, even if we disagree from time to time. I think one of the most effective ways, and it's been proven over and over again, is public-private partnerships. And, so we know that we can make a real difference. PPP was a great example of public-private partnerships going into effect. About half of all PPP loans made through the pandemic were done by CBA members, by the leading banks. And CBA-led efforts on advocacy led to about 97% of those loans being forgiven. And so that is a true testament of what can be done when policymakers and the banking system joins together to make sure that we're meeting the needs of America. We've also called for, more recently, kind of anticipating some of the challenges ahead, for an all-of-government approach to fraud. We hear and see, from our members how much time and resources they're spending to combat not only fraud internally and protecting their own systems and things of that nature, but also consumer scams. How do we help consumers become more educated about the scams that are in the market? There's been a huge rise in these number of scams. And so we're calling on the government to also step in. So whether it's a CFPB to educate consumers, they've got a mission to do that. Whether it's a FCC to really help, on the communication side, make sure that spoofing's not occurring. There's a whole number of agencies that can take very meaningful action to help consumers in this area. And we've really focused some of our efforts on that. And we actually are getting some really positive response from it. So we're really hopeful in that area as well.
Such an important point to maintain confidence and be able to get the right information to customers and put the banking system on a path where they're out ahead of some of the fraudsters, because I know it's such a big issue. So, Lindsey, in this environment, customer expectations are rising. Customer behaviors have shifted more heavily to digital channels. Customers are looking for banks to really look out for them and help them better manage their cash flows. So I know you're a big advocate for the industries, but I'll ask you to take a more objective kind of stance here. Where do you think the industry is meeting these raised customer expectations, and where do you see that there's still work to do, or perhaps we're falling short a bit?
Well, I think, one, I think that the banks are spending billions of dollars to do just that, right? And that really, those investments, technology, all the capacity that they were building up, proved out very well for them in the pandemic. They were prepared. They were able to meet the consumers' needs, but they have been just propelled through this technological evolution. And you've got, the leading banks who are really on the cutting edge, and they're
Yeah.
thinking way further ahead than many of their peers are able to do. So you see some smaller banks who are partnering with fintech, who are really trying to leverage other technologies to anticipate consumers' needs. And as you said, to kind of help them on that entire financial journey, as a consumer is trying to be financially prepared for what's next. I think as we've moved into this, digital age, and even just so much further than we would have anticipated now that we've come through the pandemic, things that we as an industry really have to be focused on are the security and the privacy and all these other areas. You've got a lot of other players in the market in this space, non-banks and fintechs and others, and that's
Yeah.
great, but they're not held to the same standards. And so how do banks partner with those institutions? How do banks themselves, make sure that they are adopting technology that is both relevant to the consumer, but also offers those consumer protections? Things like biometric authentication is, an area where I think that you're going to see more movement because we just have to stay ahead of this fraud and other scams that are occurring. So I think that there's an understanding of those challenges, but we are constantly trying to make sure that we're staying ahead of it.
Yeah. Well, I certainly am biased here, but this movement towards banks and fintechs collaborating, creating an environment where they can work more effectively together, all in the interest of creating, let's say, an ecosystem, a stronger ecosystem, whether that's around products or capabilities or solutions, all in the benefit of customers. You could see a lot of positive movement in that direction, and I'll say commitment on the part of the fintechs, but more importantly, on the part of the banks as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, they have no choice, right? You've got to evolve or you are being disrupted. And so there is a complete recognition, I think, at every level of the banking industry that they've got to adapt and they have to evolve. And what I think is promising is there was a little bit of adversarial nature to it, but it's much more complementary now. And I think that there's
Yeah.
a recognition among the fintechs, that it is really important and valuable to have that deposit base. And from the banks, that nimbleness that you can see from the fintechs, I think it's a win-win when it's the right situation.
Yeah. Let me ask you to comment on something that's, closer to my heart, which is, the work that we do around having banks better leverage advanced data and analytics to be able to better understand customer needs, anticipate their needs, and then deliver more intelligent and personalized experiences. I'd love to hear your thoughts here in terms of, first of all, why do you believe this is important for the industry to take big steps forward here? And how do you think it can really help the relationship between customers and banks?
Well, one, I mean, I think it's absolutely a win-win, right? It's a huge win for the banks themselves. They're more efficient. They're better able to underwrite and analyze consumers. I think for consumers, you really could see, the potential for this technology to better underwrite, to better bring more individuals into the banking system. It's got incredible promise. And so I think that we really have to understand and harness that technology and promote it in just that way of really being able to reach more consumers more effectively, efficiently, to manage risk, to manage fraud, all those different things. I think, the challenge for banks, and it's going to be a challenge going forward. You hear it even from the CFPB, this discussion about, the use of AI and disparate treatment and, the potential for that. So for banks, it's, they really have to be thinking about it from all angles. How do I really use this technology and harness this technology for good, while at the same time really working with the regulatory agencies to make sure that we can use it and that we can appropriately monitor it. We understand how it's being used. We understand how it's impacting consumers. But I think that this is going to be something that is a huge positive for the industry. I think it's great for consumers, and really changes sort of the landscape going forward of how banks interact and engage with their customers.
Yeah, it's a great point. Another trend that we're seeing now is the movement towards open banking. And as opposed to other parts of the world where it's being more regulatory driven or legislated, here it's much more market driven, the movement towards open banking in the US, which is great because it's going to put more control in the hands of customers in terms of how their data is used and what solutions they'd like to have to be able to build on their banking relationship to perhaps have more comprehensive solutions. So I'm curious as to your thoughts here. How do you think open banking will affect the industry, and what do you think are some of the challenges or the opportunities for banks to be well prepared to capitalize on the capability in the interest of their customers?
Well, CBA has been, long supported, I think similar to what I'm hearing from you, this notion of consumers having access and control of their own financial information.
Yeah.
That's essential. And you see a lot of our banks, not only open to this and supportive of this, but moving towards that, as you mentioned. And so I think that there is this huge movement towards that more open banking concept that we've been talking about for so long. The one area where I think we're going to have some challenges, and we're going to have to work through them because the devil's going to be in the details, is a rulemaking that the CFPB is doing right now to implement Section 1033 of the Dodd-Frank Act, which is really consumers' access to their financial data. Mm-hmm. And we've seen some outlines from the Bureau that really hint at, banks are going to be required to give over financial information to non-banks. It's really only depositories right now. And we want to make sure that that's level because that's completely anti-competitive. That creates some real skews in the marketplace. And you've also got to make sure that consumers understand exactly what information is being transmitted, how it's being used by the other provider, what data protections and consumer protections that other provider has. So
Right.
There's a lot of work to be done just to get this right because the risks involved are very big if we don't get it right. So we're really focused on that. We're going to be really following it very closely and working with the CFPB and other stakeholders to make sure that it's done well.
Yeah. You talked about how the CBA can really help the industry progress in terms of innovation. What do you see are some of the role that the CBA can play, as well as some of the tactics that they can use to help spur on innovation in the industry?
I think one of the most important things that CBA does for our members is the connection that we create. We provide content, so we've got webinars from our partners. We provide them data and information, but that connection that they get through the 14 committees that CBA has is an opportunity for them to hear and learn and engage with other industry leaders. We've got CBA Live, which is our signature event that's coming up in March, where you're going to hear from some of the best and the brightest in the industry about cutting edge technology and how different banks are employing different strategies for their institutions. And so I think that that's one of the best ways that CBA can really convene the industry, harness those discussions, and harness that intellectual know-how and experience to hopefully enable other banks to continue to create and innovate for themselves. That's
great. Well, since it's called Banking on Innovation, I had to at least hear your perspective on why that's so important for the industry. I know CBA does an amazing job of creating not just purpose around the primary topics, but also the right degree of sharing. I mean, you've got a very impressive board of many of the large banks as well as mid-sized banks as well. And there are so many areas that banks should be cooperating on to be able to move the industry forward and benefit customers' financial well-being.
I couldn't agree more. And this case of consumer scams and fraud and, what more we can be doing as an industry. I mean, our board is incredibly engaged. Yeah. And you see a lot of collaboration on issues like that because really it's not a competitive issue at all. And we want to make sure that the industry is held to the highest standard, that consumers have all that they, need on a going forward basis. So I agree. Our board is terrific. Our members are terrific. The connection and the collaboration that happens is really, kind of second to none here at CBA. So couldn't be more proud of that.
Yeah. So, Lindsey, let me cap it off by asking you to kind of lean forward a bit and think about what will customers demand from their banks and the industry in the next 3 to 5 years that we're perhaps not fully prepared for right now?
I think that there is such an anticipation of what that is going to be. And you see different banks taking different strategies to try and understand and pursue that, right? So you see some of the best and the biggest banks going out and purchasing fintechs that are, food delivery services. You see them investing in travel, different travel options and offering rewards through those different travel options. There's just so much that I think that the consumer is going to come to expect from their financial services provider, in addition to the kind of overall financial wellness and their planning. And I know that, my bank, and I've got a couple of different banks that I use, they are incredibly, adept at understanding exactly what, I'm trying to do from a financial goal perspective. And so they proactively reach out to me and say, we know that you've got, X account. Are you looking to build on that? And here's some thoughts that, you should consider as you think about your long-term goals. That's incredibly effective. It puts the power back in my hands. And I think that that's exactly what consumers are going to demand going forward. Is it's not a sales pitch. It is really enabling consumers to meet their overall financial goals. So that's incredibly exciting to me. And different banks are going about that in different ways. You see them testing out different strategies to do that. But then you also see, banks kind of venturing out and saying, okay, what more do consumers want from us? How can we be that, kind of a go-to one-stop shop for other services?
It's very exciting to just watch the degree of innovation in the industry. I think cycle times around innovation have really compressed. And
Agreed.
In the interest of understanding customer needs, being able to demonstrate that you are looking out for customers, not just selling products, but identifying, for instance, should you be in a different product because it'll save you money, or be aware of these things or take action on these things, for instance, to avert a cash flow issue 7 to 10 days from now. And I could see the industry, and particularly the industry leaders, really leaning in on these areas that are in service of delivering a better, more personalized experience for the customer. And the recognition that by doing so will create a stronger and more loyal customer franchise.
I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, we talk about high touch, high tech, and I think that high touch will still be there from a person-to-person perspective. But it's also high touch in terms of understanding that consumer so well that you are anticipating their needs and you're thinking about their goals and how to help them meet those goals. So it's a really exciting time to be a bank. It's an exciting time to be on the front lines helping consumers and helping communities because we've got access to a lot of these technologies we've never had before.
Well said, Lindsey. Well, let's end with that. I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed our discussion and how thankful I am for you joining us on this podcast. While you are clearly a big advocate of the industry, I'll just share with you that you have a lot of advocates among us as well. So I wish you the best. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and perspective with our audience.
Jody, thanks for having me again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining another episode of Banking on Innovation. Make sure you subscribe to get future podcast episodes or follow us on Twitter @Personetics or on Personetics.com.